And now I would like to introduce Paula Ramos. Paula is a partner at McKinsey Company, and she is one of the leaders of the healthcare and consumer goods practices in the Americas. She has been heavily involved in women's advancement in Latin America. Prior to her recent move to the United States, she led a women's initiative for McKinsey in Latin America, which is part of the Women Matter research initiative in the region. And she is also part of Mulheres do Brasil group, which is comprised of key female CEOs, there are some, lots of them, whose mission is to promote gender equality at the national level in Brazil. And this morning, Paula will be presenting the findings of McKinsey Global Institute's report entitled The Power of Parity, how advancing women's equality can add $12 trillion to global growth. And we're first going to be showing you a short video that McKinsey has put together, and you have copies of the report on your desks. So, video.
Thanks for the warm introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very inspired by the sheer number of you and also the quality of the conversation we just had. So thank you. So 20 years ago, the world leaders gathered to sign the Beijing Declaration. And then last month, they came back to this very city to actually set up a new set of sustainable development goals, in which one of them is dedicated to gender equality. We at McKinsey, through our McKinsey Global Institute, thought that would be a great opportune moment, actually a historical moment, to go back and compile and actually complement a lot of the research that we have, as well as others, driven on gender equality, to actually make a call to action in a very structured and data-heavy way, to just prove how important, in fact, closing the gap on gender equality is for the economic advancement and actual growth of the global economy in the coming decade. So in the next 10 minutes, I will not try to give you a synthesis of the 150 pages on this report. I'm sure you will be able to take a look at it, and we'll be more than happy to go into details separately. Instead, I would like to highlight a few of the findings that are specific to Latin America, because within this effort, we looked at, as pointed out in the video, over 95 countries that actually are housed more than 90% of the women and of the GDP in the world. But we did look in detail into 11 Latin American countries, including Argentina, Brazil, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela, to actually see within the global learnings what would be really the most relevant ones for us to take to our region. So, as perhaps you were able to understand from the video, if every country were to close the gap that they have on gender equality, just to the point of their best immediate regional best practice, so within Latin America, in this case, we would be looking mostly into Chile, but not that everyone will get to the levels of where Sweden is, for example, but just within their regions, if they were to get to their best, the economic GDP that you could derive from that by 2015 is $12 trillion. That's a lot of money. If we were able to then accelerate that and take everyone to best practice, and in the next decade, close the gender gap worldwide to the best practice in the world, that would represent $28 trillion. That's the equivalent of the US and the China economy together today. So what we hope to do here is to take the moral and societal imperative to actually taking action to close the gap, to making this really a growth imperative, an economic imperative, not only on the institutional level for the different companies, as was referred before, as benefiting a lot from diversity, but in a world where we are really all striving and sometimes starving for growth, to making the economic argument to pursue those initiatives. So we believe that the impact, the 12 trillion we talked about, is not only a very exciting aspiration, but also a legitimate one, because, as I said, it will take, only doing what your best comparable, arguably culturally equivalent country is doing to actually get there. So how do you actually get to that value? And we see that there are actually 3 types of gender gaps that need to be addressed. There are labor force participation, the hours worked, which is very linked to how much or the disproportionate amount of unpaid care we women tend to do in terms of hours worked, and differences in productivity. For us in Latin America, labor force participation alone would contribute to more than 50% of the economic impact we can have. So in many ways, it's a little easier for us than in other regions when in fact you have issues going into a lot more variables than we have in LATAM. So how can women achieve gender equality in the work? We believe that there is economic potential that requires women to be equal participants in the economy as well as in the society. So what we found out in the deep research is that, as we perhaps already knew on a very intuitive basis, we now have data that shows how important it is to not only address the inequalities at work, but also look at important inequalities that happen on the society level that pertain to access to certain services, such as health and education, equal laws, representation in the biggest government bodies, and so on, to actually get to the equality we need at work as well. So the way we found to make that interlinkage very clear is to create what we are calling the gender parity score that comprises of more than 15 indicators that have been studied in depth to actually compare different countries and find out where they are in their different developments. So what you see in that data is that no region in the world has actually been able to achieve to date gender equality. The GDP ranges from 0.44 in South Asia, which is the lagging or the most challenged region, to 0.74 in North American Oceania. So even us here, we're not all the way there, as I know much of you feel in your day-to-day level work. In Latin America, we are more or less midway at 0.64, which gives us great opportunity to move forward because we already shattered some of the most important factors, but also have many to go. So what is it that matters in Latin America? Where are we behind in the world and what needs to be addressed? So out of the 15, there are 2 that are very important to us. Political and legal representation. We have a few examples of quote-unquote victories that have happened, especially in Chile, in terms of getting that number up. But you wouldn't be surprised to find out that in LATAM in general, only 30% of parliament or ministerial positions are held by women. And because of that gap, we face important differences on how laws and legislations actually help us in a more universal way within our countries move forward the advancement of women. The second one has to do with gender equality at work. I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to find out that in LATAM, women spend 3 times the time as men in unpaid care work. This is important work that needs to be done for our families. We need to find a way to actually make it either recognized or more equal among the two of us. We were also sad, and I personally a little more surprised with this one, which says that still today, when you look in Latin America, 40% of women are faced with intimate partner violence. This is unacceptable, and it's not particular to any one country, but it's still to think that 1 or 4 in every 10 of us still face that kind of basic violence is quite shocking. So what do you do with that, right, given those challenges? We actually, of the 10 things that can be done, or the 10 platforms, 5 of them are global, and 5 of them are regional in terms of specific challenges that different regions are. The good news is us in LATAM are not so challenged that we were deserving of any of the 5 that are regional. However, we are very prominent in need for 3 of the 5 global initiatives. Those are the gaps in essential services that covers healthcare, education, financial inclusion, digital inclusion, legal rights and political representation, and then physical security and autonomy. We have a strong belief and have taken steps to actually map what kind of interventions can be taken to tackle gender inequality, and have, as you're going to see in the report, codified more than 150 case examples of things that have been tactically done in different parts of the world to close those gaps. Of those interventions, there are a few learnings that come that I think could be of relevance for us as we think about not only our careers, but also what we can do, in the position of leaderships that we are today and that we'll advance to have even more in the future. First of all is that successful programs tend to combine interventions that tackle multiple barriers simultaneously. So for example, there was an interesting one on child marriage in Ethiopia that offered financial transfers that link those financial transfers for families to girls staying at school. So that combined with better equipped schools, often safer schools, community dialogues to actually change the mindsets around very child bride practices, and skill building programs that were specific for girls and actually tapped into a lot of the talents where we are ahead of men, such as more creative and technical issues. So girls in those programs, after only a couple years, were 90% less likely to be married than the ones that were outside. So as you see, it's not only creating the financial incentives for the family, but doing everything that needs to happen around that program to make it successful. The second learning when analyzing the many initiatives is that economic opportunity creation is a very powerful intervention that goes well beyond jobs for women and can turn into a power lever to improve the social status of women. So it's not only about offering the job, but giving those employed the voice within their organizations and more widely in society to share their experiences, such as in events as today, but on a much smaller scale, and actually inspire other younger women to pursue the same path. And finally, that accelerating the progress towards gender parity cannot be achieved by a single player. So to accelerate the 8 years that we talked about before to 10 years, you're actually going to have to combine what the private sector can do, and I know we have a few representatives here of companies that have taken a stance to actually advance the theme of gender equality. It will take the governments, NGOs, and wider bodies such as the UN, who have taken special attention to that, and I'm glad to hear of the G20 initiative for women as well, to actually push this forwards and make sure that instead of 80 years at the current pace that we have today, we can actually make progress by, in the next decade, to achieve the growth that I spoke, the economic growth that I mentioned in the beginning. Thank you very much.